Welcome into the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network. This is Season 1, Episode 6, presented by our partners at Bent River SportsBook. I am Joshua Perry, joined by my guy, Christian Hackenberg. And for this week, you're getting the travel edition of the show. Both Hack and I are out of town, so we're doing this from hotel rooms. Not necessarily the most ideal setup, but we're trying to get you guys the best Big Ten content you can receive. So we're going to give it to you any way we can.
Just a bunch of road dogs right now. Just two road dogs. That's all we do.
Got to make sure the lights are on, the bills are paid. You know what I'm saying?
No doubt.
Man. So we'll go through a recap of week 4 of Big Ten play. And as we were heading into it last week, it didn't feel like there was going to be a ton that we were going to take away. The matchups were they were okay. And there ended up being some decent surprises. So I'll run through the scores here, and then we'll get you a couple game recaps. So Penn State was playing Villanova at home. They beat them 38-17. Notre Dame beat the piss out of Wisconsin 41-13. We'll definitely dive into that game. Maryland beat Kent State 37-16. Northwestern beat Ohio 35-6. The MAC upset of the week in the Big Ten was Minnesota losing to Bowling Green 14-10. Purdue beat Illinois 13-9. Rutgers gave Michigan all they could handle. Michigan won that one 20-13. We had Iowa and Colorado State facing off. Iowa, of course, undefeated, still 24-14 was the score of that one. We had Ohio State hosting Akron, a bounce-back game for the Buckeyes. 59-7 was the score there. We had Indiana visiting Western Kentucky, which is just wild to me, but they ended up eking that one out 33-31. And then finally, Nebraska and Michigan State facing off in a great night game. Michigan State ended up pulling that one out in overtime. The score of that was 23-20. Running through the AP top 25 here, Penn State is at number 4. Iowa's at number 5. Ohio State drops out of the top 10 to number 11. Michigan moves up to number 14. Michigan State is at number 17. Wisconsin falls out of the top 25. Maryland is the second highest in the receiving votes category. And just around college football, Clemson is at number 25, which is something we haven't seen in a long ass time. Notre Dame is up to number 8, and we'll kind of talk about their ranking there. We'll start off with the game of the week. This was Fox's big noon game. It was Wisconsin, Notre Dame. Like I said, the score of that one was 41-13. Wisconsin has some real issues. Defense is solid. They held Notre Dame to 3 yards rushing, which is really impressive. Your boy Graham Mertz has some problems at the quarterback position, though.
Yeah, I mean, I know the score is 41-13, but I think that game didn't really get out of hand until the fourth quarter. I thought it was a lot closer until that final round there. So, I just think Wisconsin right now, they've had a really tough time building in, and something that you and I have talked about, and you've provided some pretty unique insight from the defensive side and me from the offensive side, because I love the brand of football, but they've had a really tough time trying to create explosive plays, whether it be separation from the outside or whatever, off of their ability to run the football, which obviously no one has really challenged for them, and they've been able to do that fairly well. And yeah, it's just surprising with Graham, especially off the year that he had last year and the expectations he had coming into this year and this season. The team seemed to be able to have the pieces in place to give them a chance. And they just really haven't been able to put it together since that Penn State game. I think it really threw a lot of rhythm off for them. So I think that was a tough one for them. I think the defense is going to keep them in some games, especially in the West, and still give them a chance, especially with Penn State having Iowa this week. And, the other thing is Minnesota lost. So there's a lot of stuff that went on that side of the division that I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up. They're still alive in the West. They haven't had a West opponent yet. So the record obviously isn't what you want it to be if you're Wisconsin, but their goals to still win the division are alive. It's interesting watching Graham Mertz, because I think it's a twofold thing with him. Is number one, I think that he just, when the game is on his arm, he is not the guy. And that isn't an uncommon thing with college quarterbacks. You've seen it where a lot of these guys aren't just going to go out there and win the game on their arm. They need a little bit of help from a run game. They need a little bit of help from play calling. And that's kind of where I'm getting with this is Graham Mertz had a couple of plays where they were able to scheme up guys that were open and he could hit them for some big gains. They had 7 plays of 15 plus in the pass game. So it wasn't all bad. But I also think that the play calling for Wisconsin is definitely an issue. And what I mean by that is Graham is a guy who's a pretty good athlete. And so is there an opportunity for them to maybe mix in just a little bit of zone read that'll help them open up their tailback run game and that'll keep defenses kind of on their toes from that regard? Is there an idea that maybe they should be doing some more spread concepts instead of the pro style concepts? And I wanted to ask you about this specifically because it's 2 really different things. And we've talked about the way that you're able to hit some of those big shots in the play action game and pressing it downfield that way. But a lot of their pass game, if it's not play action, it's just straight drop back. And I think what you have there is some skinnier windows to throw into if you're a quarterback, whereas you see some of these offenses that are more predicated off of putting defensive players in conflict. That's where you get some of those gaping windows and you give the guy the ability to catch and run. So just philosophically from you, do you think that is something that a team could transition to throughout the year? Number one. Number two, do you think that's something that could help Wisconsin?
Yeah. So the one thing that I will say is a big part of pro style ball, right? So like my freshman year when I was with Bill, we didn't run a ton of that RPO stuff. And it was mainly predicated on the fact that we still ran RPO type concepts with my ability to get on the edge in the play action, moving the pocket. So like the naked game, the slide game, those types of things. Wisconsin traditionally done a little bit of that, but I think it's become a focal point in terms of formationally giving from presentations, being able to get guys in spots from different areas on the field and create the same play over and over again in terms of spots, flooding the zone if you're going to move it backside, right? But just uniquely, like whether it's 2 receivers to the naked side or a single receiver when you're bringing 2 guys over from the strength, whatever it may be, however you want to scheme it up, you can kind of do it creatively. I think that could be a bigger part to give that aspect of Graham being able to use his legs. If you want to keep everything consistent in terms of we're a downhill run team, we're going to work off big play action. We have some drop back for our 3rd down situations, but on normal downs, 1st down, it's a good little change up. It's almost like a screen game. Cause as a defensive player, it gets hard for those defensive ends. If you're running zone, and the backside cut, the defensive end is constantly upfield, and the quarterback's not keeping the ball. They're going to fold eventually. And that's where you have that opportunity to get Graham on the edge. And if it's not there, he can at least get 5 and get out of bounds or whatever it may be. So I think if you want to stay consistent within the pro style thought process, that's a great way to do it, and sprinkling that in more consistently within your play calling. But to your point, it's the zone run game, and then being able to build RPOs off of it is not that far fetched. And so many kids nowadays have done that at some point in time in their career due to the amount of how much it's become a big player in high school ball, and even younger than that, little league and things of that nature, if a kid can throw it. So it's not a hard concept to put in. And especially with some of the tight ends that Wisconsin has, it can create some mismatches and some issues when you're doing it. And as we've talked about before, the RPO game creating such a stress on the defense because it's really like an illegal. It's not fair because you got guys going downfield. They always toe that like 2 to 3 yard threshold.
Yep.
So there's 2 different approaches to it, I think, that they could take. And ultimately that's going to come up to what they want to do offensively and where they see their team best fits. But there definitely needs to be a change. And I think there definitely needs to be more of a thought process in that, in terms of taking some pressure off him from having to make those throws consistently in the drop back game, maybe moving the pocket a little bit, still mixing in those big play actions because they have been able to hit them, but you can't live and die by that.
No, That's really good stuff right there. And you talked about how easy it is to mix that stuff in from that carryover from high school and little league. I think that's a really good point. And then the other thing that you talked about that I think shouldn't be overshadowed is the tight ends for Wisconsin are absolutely the best playmakers in the passing game. And so any way that they can get creative. And it was funny because we were watching the game and Notre Dame's best playmaker in the receiving game is a tight end too. That kid's really good. And we were seeing tight end screens from both teams. And I don't know if we see tight end screens in the game plan for any teams really. So just those types of concepts where you can get the playmakers in position to make the plays, I think is really big. This is a Big Ten show, obviously, but I've got a Notre Dame thing in there for later. So we'll circle back on those cats. I want to get into this Rutgers at Michigan that we saw last week, because both of us have talked about how Rutgers is a team that's really building in the Big Ten, and they're frankly dangerous. And they gave Michigan all that they could handle in that game. And just kind of going through some of the stats, like this one was startling for me, is Michigan only had 42 yards in the second half of the game. They went 3 and out on 4 consecutive drives in the second half. I think that is as much a testament to how good Rutgers is on defense as it is an indictment on Michigan's offensive philosophy. And just kind of going through again, Michigan's been a heavy run team. They were their top 5 run team in FBS, and they leave that game with 112 yards off of 38 rushes for the game. It's not where they want to be. And then Cade McNamara, as he had to kind of sit back there and do some more drop back, throw it into a window, hit a guy to make a big play. He was 9 of 16 for $163. It's a very pedestrian day. Rutgers is probably a lot better than people really anticipate that they are. And I believe Michigan is still a really good football team, but they've definitely got some flaws on offense.
Yeah, I think to speak to Rutgers' point, and was Schiano at Ohio State when you were there?
No, he was there.
He came right after,
a couple years after I left. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Schiano is a great defensive mind. And to me, especially in the Big Ten, that's a great way to build a program, is get a defense that plays really, really tough, knows what they're doing, flies around and starts making some plays. And then offensively, I think the way that this RPO system and things of that nature give that offense a little bit more of an advantage, any offense, you can plug and play. If you got a good athlete at the quarterback position, you can create some things schematically to give your offense an opportunity to move the ball down the field. So, and that's not to take away from the kid up there right now. I think he's one of the only guys in college football that hasn't thrown an interception, and he's playing really well. But I still do think that Rutgers is not quite there yet, top to bottom roster. But like we've been saying, they're getting there, and I think they're going to be a force in the Big Ten, or a consistent contender at least within the next 5 years. Moving on to Michigan, I was looking up some stats from that game and looking at some preview for this Wisconsin game coming up this weekend. And, Wisconsin's talking about how they're not worried about if the game ever has to go to Cade being the guy to make some plays and move that offense and whatnot. But Michigan has ran the ball 74% of the time. And when you sit there and you look at that, that's a pop out stat, comparatively speaking, to the rest of college football. I mean, it's almost old school. Like that's early 2000s, late 90s type ball right there.
It is old school. And that's where Jim wants to live with his philosophy on offense, is he wants that run game and then a quarterback who's not going to turn the ball over.
Yeah. And they have that. And, I think it's going to be tough though, because I think you brought up a great stat earlier about Wisconsin's defense. I mean, they held Notre Dame to 3 yards rushing. And if they can force Michigan to do that, I think it's going to be interesting to see if Cade is that guy that can go out and win that game and just play efficient football. Because at the end of the day, I think if they can wear on them, they're going to be able to run the football just the way that they've done it. They're still going to be able to figure out creative ways to run the football. And it may not be that where you're ripping off 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yards a carry. But eventually, if you wear it down, if you run it 35, 40 times a game, there's going to be 2 or 3 things that pop just because of the talent you have. But it's going to be interesting to see if they can really force them and pigeonhole them into getting some early TFLs, keeping them behind the sticks and forcing Cade to move that ball down the field. I think that'll be a good test for him. But to your point, I think this Michigan team's still a very talented team. They have a very deep, relatively older receiving core. Obviously, losing Bell hurt, but I still think that they have some guys out there that can make some plays, and we'll see what happens. I think that they're still building and they're still trying to figure out some identity with a relatively cupcake schedule early on in the season. But yeah, I mean, I think Rutgers is a team that can, and then going back, I think Rutgers is a team that can definitely beat somebody that none of us expect this year. And they proved it.
No, I agree. And it's interesting talking about how run heavy Michigan is because it is so foreign, like you said, in college football right now. But you always start to ask the question just in terms of, when games get tight, like the game that they were in, when your quarterback is not in rhythm and he's not necessarily an accurate passer, you get in some 1st and 10 situations where maybe you feel like you got to throw the ball and it's an incompletion on 1st and 10. Then you're in a 2nd down situation where it's 2nd and 10. That's not a very good place to be in. Right. And so maybe you run the ball, maybe you throw the ball, whatever the case is, but then you're in a 3rd down situation. That's probably not great either. And then you look back and you passed the ball a couple of times on that drive and you went 3 and out. So you used none of the clock and you didn't move the football at all. And your quarterback is now having to do things that are uncharacteristic because of how much you leaned on the run game early on. Like those are the types of things that you start to think about just in terms of the way that a football game goes. And so that's what I'm looking out for. You talked about if the game's on McNamara and what can his efficiency look like. I'm also looking at, from an offensive standpoint, can you call a game that sets up for different situations, that builds off of, I think the best play callers are the ones that they're calling a play right now that's setting up something that's 2, 3, 4 plays down the line. And a lot of that comes down to, I think, your ability to call a great 1st and 10 play.
Yeah. Now let me throw something in there. So like one thing that I think could be really good for Michigan moving into this game, you have an aggressive defense, is being able to build in a really good screen package, especially in early downs, because it's very unexpected for the most part. Like being able to screen teams early, get them on their toes, get that defensive line thinking, and that's going to create a little bit more tendency, especially in those 1st and 2nd downs. If you do it consistently enough and creatively enough, it doesn't necessarily have to be running back screens. It could be some flanker screens, some tunnel screens, some tight end screens, some things of that nature to slow everything down, give another layer for them to think about. It could slow some things down and create some things in the running game. But let me bounce on that. You as a defensive player and your experience playing, when you're heading into a game like this, and if you're watching film from this previous game that Michigan had against Rutgers, how excited are you, though, about the opportunity, like you're saying, to force a quarterback who really hasn't done it in terms of being a consistent guy who can make plays on 1st and 2nd down, throwing the ball in a drop back situation, whatever it may be, but pushing the ball down the field in some early downs to make plays and keep the team on schedule consistently throughout 4 quarters. Like defensively, what's your mindset as a linebacker, and what are you excited for moving forward throughout the game?
We used to live off of stuff like that. The Big Ten championship in 2014 is the example there, where we were facing Wisconsin, who had Melvin Gordon, who was a Heisman finalist that year, and a really good offensive line, but they had Joel Stave at quarterback, who he had his limitations, and I can't. This is not to disparage any of the guys playing on that team, but like I couldn't tell you who was in their wide receiver core because it's just not what they did. And so what we ended up doing was we played what we called over black, and that was just straight up man to man. Like our safeties were on the line of scrimmage, on the tight ends. Everybody was in the fit, and we just knew that we were going to be aggressive and we were going to stop the run. And what that did for us was our linebackers could just run through gaps. That's all we were doing. It was like, just run through it. Just keep going. And so you're able to build an aggressive mentality, but also when it's time for the quarterback to throw the football, like we talked about, that's a guy who is now in a position that he hasn't been in before. And so there's a lot of thinking, and the quarterback is tentative at that point. And it puts, not only does it put pressure on the quarterback, but it also puts pressure on wide receivers to get open when those guys know that they haven't had to do that all year. And so it's really unique. But you talked about a couple of things that also put a little bit of fear into the defense, is the screen game primarily. And you mentioned not necessarily doing running back screens, but wide receiver screens and tight end screens. But I'll tell you right now, they've got some guys who are dangerous, in my opinion, if that's the way that they want to go offensively. Blake Corum at running back, I think, is one of the best playmakers in the conference. He's a guy who, like, 7 yards can become 70 yards right away. He's that electric. You get him in the screen game, it's dangerous. They got a cat named Eric All at tight end, who I think is a really good player. And so it's a double-edged sword, right? Because you want to be the aggressor and you want to start running through. But if you're facing a competent offense, they're going to have an answer every single time you think that you're going to gain the edge on defense.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great point, man. And I think that's what's cool, because you bring up those times when you know that they're in obvious passing downs, and being in a hole like that offensively, I've been there. It's almost intimidating, especially when you're playing a team like you guys. Like, I've been there. I played that team that you guys had in 2013, 14, and 15, and you guys were really good. And it was tough when you were in that situation, because you knew you were pinning your ears back up front with your front four, but then the back seven knew, like, hey, he's throwing the football. So, it was almost just like, hey, everyone knew it. So you're sitting there like, damn, like, everyone in the stadium knows what's coming right here. And they do too. And they're really good, and they're coached well, and they play really fast. So that's an intimidating position. I thought that was some really good perspective there for people listening in. Like, that's a tough spot to be in.
No, I agree. I mean, it's always nice when you can be the aggressor offensively or defensively, and you get to dictate what the game plan is. So that'll be something, and we'll catch up on that in the next segment as well. But that'll be something for that game. That'll definitely be an eye opener. This last one, the nightcap in the Big Ten from last week, Nebraska at Michigan State. And we talked about this game as one that was going to be close. It was going to be a game where you felt like either team would have an opportunity to win it, because of what we've seen out of Nebraska as a team that is, even though they're losing, they're still building. And what we know about Michigan State is just a tough, gritty team. And I think that was basically what we got out of that. Michigan State is gritty as hell. Nebraska is really close. I love Martinez. I think he's a tough-ass quarterback. He never stopped coming in that game. It was just, he got knocked out. He came back in the game. He played as hard as he could. The thing for me about Nebraska, though, is they have absolutely killed themselves in the special teams game. They had the safety in the first game. They have missed kicks every single week. It feels like they let Michigan State return that punt for a touchdown. Like, if they don't have special teams flubs and errors, they might be undefeated right now. And that's crazy to say.
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to look up the stat because you brought it up, and I saw the stat earlier in the week. Like, it's an insane special teams point differential. And
I think the stat, that the one that I saw at least, was like they've lost games by a total of 18 points on the year, and the swing in special teams points is like 25 or whatever.
Yeah, it's
something crazy like that.
And and that's one thing I will say. And you look across all your experiences in football, right? And you look at really good football teams, and they're always sound. And the one thing I will give a ton of credit to Ohio State, at least traditionally, is that they played their best players on special teams. Yeah. Like, there were starters that were special teams war daddies, and they put as much of a focus on that as they did in everything.
I was a 4-year special teamer at Ohio State. Yeah. I played on the punt team all 4 years. I played on most of the units for 3 years, and I was a starter in my sophomore year. That was always the philosophy. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, too, I feel like that made me a smarter football player, just because now you understand the game you understand leverage a lot better, and you understand the importance of those specific plays and how they fit into the game of football. But yeah, I think that's a big deal. Like, some teams emphasize, and I'm not saying that Scott doesn't, because like I don't know how you fix a missed kicks the way that they've had it, but like some teams will be great in the special teams arena, and other teams that's literally the difference in the game for them.
But I mean, they even gave up a couple punt returns and a couple kick returns this year, right? Am I wrong in that? Like, so when you sit there and you think about it, like just the total package, right? Like obviously, like the kicking miscues, like that is what it is. It could be operational, it could be the kicker. Who knows, right?
Right.
But you know, the best teams always put an emphasis on all three phases to me, and they're very, very good in all three phases. And no one's too big for anything. And like I said, I have no idea. I'm probably going to have to do some research now because I'm talking shit about it. But you know, like I'd be curious to see how many guys are playing for them, big players, guys who are sound tacklers. And, you know, like I said, the kicking thing's its own thing, but how much of an emphasis they put on that, because it's a big part of the game, man. It wins and loses your ball games. And like you said, you know, 18 points and they've lost however many games by a total of 18 points. Like it adds up. And, you know, Michigan State, and like you said, I think they showed that they're scrappy. They showed what we expected. I think Michigan State is another team in the East, similar to Rutgers, who is not quite there yet, but I think they're a little bit further ahead. I think they have a little bit more juice offensively, a little bit more explosion. They're another team that can come out and beat somebody that's not expecting it if they're sleeping and walking into that game. So that was a good thing to see them. It was a good win for that program and where they're at this year, specifically speaking. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the year plays out for them. But I think Nebraska just really, they need to get it together, and they need to, those little things that they're killing themselves. You can't do that week in, week out and expect different results.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it's, Scott Frost has said as much in his press conferences. It feels like the same movie. I tend to agree with that. And I think he's got to be as frustrated as ever too, because of all the negativity that was heaped on that program and all the commentary and people like me, the talking heads who were, you know, talking about how bad of a team that would be. They're really not a bad football team. They just keep killing themselves. So they got to tighten that up.
Let me tell you about our sponsors over at BetRivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up yet, BetRivers is offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart from everyone else is that they require just one playthrough to turn that bonus into cash money. With their new Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawals are not only fast, they are safe, secure, and reliable. Go to betrivers.com today or download the BetRivers iOS app. Must be 21 years or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Before we get into our second segment, I wanted to ask you, and I don't know how much you've watched this guy. I don't know how much you paid attention to Minnesota football this season. Tanner Morgan, though, who in 2019 was the second best quarterback in the Big Ten, in my opinion, behind Justin Fields. He's in a bad way right now, man. Like, this is not good. Stat line from the last game. He was 5 of 13 for 59 yards, and he had 2 interceptions. It's bad football.
Yeah, he was sacked 4 times. You know, like you said, you know, coming off a 2019 year, he threw for 3,200 yards, 30 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. 2020 was okay. You know, 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 5 picks. And I really, the one thing I will say is a quarterback's best friend's his running game, and Mo not being there, I think definitely threw a monkey wrench in his process and his role on that team. I thought when you had Mo, they complemented each other really well because it took a lot of pressure off Tanner. He knew his role and he played it really, really well. Now Tanner's looked at as the guy that has to go out and make plays consistently. And when you're a senior and you haven't necessarily ever had to do that, right? It's a tough peek out. You know that the entire dependency of how the offense is going is sitting on your shoulders, and you haven't done it before. That's tough. And like I said, he just looks out of rhythm. He looks out of sorts. It's hard to pinpoint one thing over the other, but I think Minnesota really needs to figure out a way how to build some type of running game creatively for him to lean on a little bit, take a little bit of pressure off him, and go out there and let him just put him in situations where he's very comfortable, because he can do that. But don't make him be something he's not. And that's where, when you start becoming something you're not, that's where you start making mistakes that ultimately cost you games.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And I think the other thing that has hurt him in his career is he had a coordinator change on offense, and you've been through the changes and how that affects you as a player, because now you might be forced to do some things differently than what maybe fits your skill set the best. And it's really tough. And then I started watching the tape on him, and I give him the benefit of the doubt on this. Is he was pretty good in the RPO passing game when they went to that. And that's what he was really good at in 2019. In the drop
Even
back
when
game,
you look at the Ohio State game, though, they did that. They put him in those situations.
Yes. And that's where he's best. When they went to drop back in this last game, he was getting tattooed. That offensive line had so much trouble picking up some of the blitzes. It was wild. And so you can't necessarily look and say he's broken, but at the same time, this is not what we expect out of Tanner Morgan.
And the other thing too is when you sit there and you want to talk about what I kind of call the ripple effect of this RPO system, right? The offensive line play, these guys, if you throw the ball 35 times a game and 10 of them, 12 of them are really run plays, like these guys, the emphasis on pass protection technique and fundamentals kind of goes out the window, because I mean, these guys are just basically taking slow run game steps, and it doesn't matter. Their job is to cut a guy loose oftentimes. So
yes, it is.
So it's hard. And like I said, I think that's just a ripple down effect of this whole RPO scheme. You know, receivers don't run as crisp routes because they're just taught to run to spots. And if the guy's not there, they get fed the ball and they don't. And the same thing trickles down even into the O-line room. So I think when you have to force those guys to start making big boy protections on 2nd and 8s and have to protect for 2.5, 3 seconds, it becomes one of those things that's not familiar for them. They don't practice it a bunch. It's not normal. And then you know, as a player, practice tempo is different than game tempo, and trying to catch up with those reps, it's hard.
The guys are different too.
Exactly.
We talked about that carryover when we were talking about Mertz from high school with quarterbacks, and you can implement a system because guys do it. The offensive line quality coming out of high school, I think, is poor in terms of pass protection, because a lot of kids they don't go up against elite pass rushers in high school anyway, but they're not doing it as much. And this is also compounded by the fact that I personally believe that there's a big difference between a 5-star offensive lineman and a 4-star, and a huge difference between a 4-star and a 3-star. And Minnesota's they're not recruiting 5-star guys up front. And so you have maybe a little bit of a lesser guy who probably hasn't gotten all the reps in over the course of a middle school and high school career. Like, that hurts too.
The other point that's unique about that too is they oftentimes, like, we kind of had to go through that when I was at Penn State because of the whole sanctions thing, right? So we were projecting a lot of the guys that we brought in my class and even the class before on the offensive line side were projected guys who were probably playing both ways in high school, could have gone and played defensive line somewhere, but they were always 6'4", 6'5", about 255, 265, maybe 270. And you needed 2 years to put 30 pounds on them and get them comfortable and get them in the situation. So I think that's kind of the formula for Minnesota when they recruit. They're looking for frames. And can we put weight on this kid? Can this kid become something? You see it in their line right now. It's a very veteran line. It's a big offensive line, and they've done that. But to your point, I just don't think that when you come into that system that they've been running, they've had some changeover, but still they very heavily relied on the RPO game the entire time Tanner Morgan's been there, and really since PJ Fleck's been there. So they're not getting that consistent coaching and that very solid fundamental background of pass protection and pass sets and how to do it consistently. And when you get some guys out there that can really make plays and put you on edges and give you speed to bulls or speed to inside, if you overset it, they're going to take you all day. Like, those are the hard things that you don't get because it's just not consistent.
That's a really good point, man. I love hearing the offensive perspective on some of those things, and talking about the, projecting frames and everything. This is the last comment I'll make before we move on to the next segment. But PJ Fleck is a guy who always talks about how he has built a program based off of high school recruiting. And so that's probably a big part of his thought process is, as he's looking at these high schoolers, he probably has to evaluate differently than Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State is when it comes to some of these different positions, because they can't get the same guy. Really, really good stuff out of you there. Segment 2, and I'm calling this Big Thoughts from here on out, but it's a little game show now. Is it for real is the question. All right, so we'll start off. Is it Michigan's run game, or is it Wisconsin's run defense that's going to be for real this week?
Well, I think that's a double-edged sword. I think Wisconsin's run defense has showed it consistently. What I will say, and something we touched on, was Michigan's ability to, from a play calling standpoint, create opportunities in the run game. If they can do that creatively with screen game, there's a lot of things you can do offensively to give a lot of thought process to that front seven, to slow them down a little bit and give you opportunities to get angles and prevent run throughs and things of that nature. So I'm going to go with the Wisconsin defensive run game, but Michigan does not have the ability to not prove that they're for real from their offensive run scheme if they tie it in properly with creative play calling and complementary play calling.
Yeah, I think that might be the direction that I go. Is I think Michigan's their run offense might show us a little bit of something. And the reason I say that is I think that Wisconsin was able to defend the last 2 teams that they played largely without having to load the box, because Penn State's not a very good direct run team. No. That was their first game. And then Notre Dame, I don't think their offensive line is that great. And so I think that Wisconsin was able to just do what they do with their front seven typically. And, that's kind of mixing up looks and getting guys on the move and everything. But it wasn't a load the box per se type of situation there. I think that Wisconsin's idea for Michigan might be that they would actually have to legitimately load the box and see if McNamara can open them up. And I just have a feeling that there are some playmakers for Michigan that can loosen that extra guy about the box, and then they can get back to that run game that they like. So that'll be the cat and mouse for me. I think they're 2 really good units, but I might have to err on the fact that Michigan's going to find a way to run the ball.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that it's the thing that you were bringing up without necessarily directly saying is I think it's going to be dependent on if Wisconsin's back end can hold up on islands. Yeah. If Wisconsin's back end can hold up on islands and create some tight window throws, off the play action game, having committed so many hats to the run game, and force McNamara to really put some balls where he needs to put them, when he needs to put them there, as opposed to there's a guy running with 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 yards of separation. I think that's truly going to depend on whether which one of that battle decides to take the edge.
Totally agree there. Second question. Is Sean Clifford's hot streak for real?
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's playing a Villanova team. The receivers stepped up. I think you saw a few guys make some plays that weren't doing that even into last year. So that's a good thing for that ball team. What I keep going back to is my comment that I've made a few times about how this offense really does feel like that Joe Moorhead 2016 team.
Yep.
I think Yurcich knows Clifford, and it was what I talked about earlier in the year on this podcast as well about how Yurcich needs to put Clifford in situations where he can succeed, where his skill set fits it and what he does well. And I think that he's done a great job at that. Now, to touch on a few other points that we've already covered with other teams, they need to figure out a way how to run the ball if they want to be a for real contender. If they want to be a dead serious contender, they need to figure out ways to run the ball. And I don't think it's a lack of talent. I love Noah Kane. I think the kid's a very tough runner. I think he can be a guy who you can feed the football to and who physically can handle the load of being a downhill between the tackles type guy that can pound out, grind out 4 yards of carry for you and keep you on schedule. So however they need to do that, formationally, with misdirection, window dressing, with motions, with Jahan, using him as a decoy, things of that nature. I think they need to focus on that. But I do think that Clifford is playing really well right now, and he's very confident, and he has shown no signs of slowing down. And I hope for his sake and for Penn State's sake that it is for real, and I think it is.
Yeah, I think the point you made about Mike Yurcich, they got the right coordinator in there. And
yes.
I can just see now that the game makes sense and the play calling makes sense and there is a rhyme and a reason. And they're trying to make sure that each playmaker is doing the things that they can do well. And so for me, I think that's where my belief comes from. And Saturday, Penn State has Indiana. So I think this will be another opportunity for Cliff to go out there. And frankly, I think Indiana has a good defense. I don't think they're world beaters. So between
the revenge game too.
It is. And
it's a revenge game too.
If I know James Franklin the way I think I might know him, he's going to try to run that score up,
Yeah, it's a revenge game.
This will be interesting, but I think his streak is for real. Maryland's offense, are they for real?
I think Talia is the best quarterback in the Big Ten right now. I mean, the guys,
100% agree.
I know there's been a few guys who've already said that, but the kid's got a real natural throwing motion. He's got a great feel for it. That offensive is explosive as hell. He's got some guys outside that can separate.
Yep.
He doesn't miss easy ones. He throws the ball very accurately, intermediate to that 8 to 25 yard range.
Yep. And
that's a deadly combination. So as long as he stays hot, that offense is going to stay hot to me in my diagnosis of it, and I've been very impressed with him. I think he's really settled in, done a great job adjusting to a new environment. And he's a very good football player.
Yeah. He's the best quarterback in the conference right now. I don't think that's a conversation. And you talked about the throwing motion. He has every arm angle in his arsenal. And you watch the way that it is so effortless for him to pick which throw to make. I think it's impressive. He's a really good athlete on his feet as well. So he keeps defenses just on edge all the time because he can extend plays. And then you talked about the weapons. They got Rakim Jarrett, who's a really good wide receiver, Dante Demas, who's doing a phenomenal job. And then in the run game, they've got Tayon Fleet Davis at running back. And this cat is averaging over 7 yards a carry. And the shame of it is for him is like there's so many weapons on that offense, he just doesn't get a ton of carries. But he's super dangerous. This is going to be interesting. We're previewing this game, but there's a Friday night matchup where Iowa travels to Maryland coming up this week, and I've got some thoughts on that for sure. Next one, Rutgers defense. Are they for real?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Next question.
Yes,
next question.
I'm on the same thing. Like you said it earlier. Those cats, I think they understand defensive football. Like they understand how fundamentally, schematically, what a good defense is supposed to look like. And they got some players over there too. But what they did against Michigan, specifically in the second half, and that's credit to the players and it's credit to the coaches for making the right adjustments. That was impressive. They thoroughly dominated Michigan that second half.
That's another great point is that oftentimes gets overlooked. everybody's got a great game plan until they get punched in the mouth and they have to make adjustments. And the best teams are the best coaching staffs, or the coaching staffs that can go in at halftime unbothered, unfazed, not panicked, and make the adjustments and put the kids in situations to be successful. And Rutgers was able to do that against a Michigan team that, Washington really wasn't what everyone thought they were going to be. But I mean, Michigan had their way with them. They ran the football up and down that football field, dominated the line of scrimmage. And from a program that had traditionally been that program where going into that game, you're like, all right, we're going to be able to do whatever we want with them the last few years. We're going to be able to run it. We're going to be able to throw it. We're going to get up by 4 scores early. We're just going to milk this clock and get up on out of here healthy and, be happy. For not having much time between that time period and where they are right now, I think that's a huge testament to that coaching staff.
I agree. And the last stat from that one defensively did not give up a point in the second half of the game either. And again, I think that was against a good Michigan team that Rutgers did that. I think it's a good defense there. We got 2 more. And this one's not a Big Ten question, but this one is one I think is intriguing for college football fans. Is Notre Dame really a top 10 team?
I don't see it. It's hard. We've had this conversation on our late night show a few times. And you sit there and when you look at the big picture of college football, and we talk about it every week about the Big Ten East in terms of the depth and who they're playing. And I just don't see, and honestly, we're going to really find out against Cincinnati. I think even though Cincinnati has been a team who's come out and started slow the last few weeks, I think they're still explosive.
Yep.
Unlike any team that Notre Dame's really played this year, they're an offense that can go out and score with them. They can play with them. They can, if they're down 2 scores, they're not out of it. It can turn really fast. Defensively, they're athletic enough to create some turnovers and create some chaos that can give the offense some short fields and some scoring opportunities early and quick and fast. So I think this week's going to be the biggest test for Notre Dame so far this season in terms of a team that is going to present as much of a threat offensively as they have to opposing teams. So I'm not sold on Notre Dame. I think they're a very ugly, undefeated team right now. I just, like I said, I don't feel like if I was in that locker room, I wouldn't feel good. Like, as a player,
I know exactly what you mean.
There's good feelings and then there's ugly feelings about winning. Yeah. And I just feel like they've always come out of games where there's a disappointment, there's a gray cloud, and there's just shadow and doom and gloom even after wins, which is hard to fathom. But I feel that's where they're at. And that's a tough situation to be in, day out, when you're walking in and out, even after practice, lifts, whatever it may be, with that just nasty taste in your mouth. And I think they're right for someone to come in and pick them off who's confident. And I think this week's going to be the real test for them. Now, if they go out and beat Cincinnati, I think we could be talking about something completely different. But right now, I'm not super sold on them.
Yeah, I think their average is shit. Just being like from a sober point of view. Yeah. And I've watched a couple of games on tape now of Notre Dame because, they had the game against Purdue and they had the game against Wisconsin. So it's been, a couple Big Ten teams. Wanted to know about them. But, they went to overtime against a Florida State team who's really bad. And I know that was a very emotional game for Florida State. So, you gotta consider all the factors there. But then they get into a game with Toledo. They don't force their will. Until the fourth quarter with Purdue. And then really, you said it earlier, but that game was a lot closer against Wisconsin than the scoreboard said. Cincinnati's coming off of a bye week as well. And then most of the teams that are playing Notre Dame for the remainder of the year are coming off a bye week. So that'll be something to look out for. Last one for you. Is Iowa for real?
Yeah, well, I think when you were talking about it, previewing this week, it's another team who, unlike Notre Dame, has figured out a way to win games and feel good about it.
Yeah.
But they haven't seen anybody. They haven't seen anybody who can go out and present real threats offensively. To your point, running game, passing game, the quarterback. I feel like Michigan really has a lot of juice, or Maryland really has a lot of juice offensively. And I think that's what we've talked about consistently in this show is just if Iowa gets in a track meet, can they keep up offensively? And I don't think they can.
No. That's being honest about it. And that's going to be the game I have my eye on for either team. It'll tell me a lot about either squad there. But this Iowa team last week against Colorado State couldn't run the football, and Colorado State's not necessarily a great run defense. They have a bad pass defense, though. They're 90th in FBS, Colorado State is. And Iowa was able to rack up 224 yards passing. And that is still below Colorado State's season average. And they're a bad pass defense team. Like there's so many flaws, I think, to a lot of teams, but Iowa specifically, that you feel like if one team just, like you said, if they can just score points, it's not going to be a good outcome.
Yeah, they've been the biggest. It's hard saying this, but like they're like the biggest letdown in the top 5 for me. Like I think they're a good football team, but I don't think they're a top 5 football team. And I know people are saying you can't penalize them for winning, but
I agree.
They just haven't. To me, they just haven't offensively shown enough juice to where if something crazy as hell happened and they ran the table and you put them in the college football playoff with the likes of an Alabama and a Georgia, I think it's going to be just embarrassing if they were to step out there on that football field. And that's just my opinion of it, just looking at it. And, we'll find out, you know what I mean? Cause they got Maryland this week and then they got Penn State next week. So we'll find out.
A little bit of a gauntlet for them. And that gets us to the third segment, our previews of week 5 action. We'll start off with that Friday night game, number 5, Iowa visiting Maryland. Iowa is a 3-point favorite per our partners over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. The over-under on that game is 47. I think we've kind of done a little bit of a preview of that. So the keys for me are Talia Tagovailoa in that Maryland offense. Can they keep up the explosion? Can they keep up the scoring against what is a really good Iowa defense, in my opinion? Like I know they haven't necessarily played the most explosive offenses, but they've done everything they were supposed to, right? So that's the question. And then I think the other question becomes, if you're Iowa, can you avoid doing dumb things offensively? Because the one thing that I think this team has done pretty well is they haven't found ways to fluster the game offensively. They're not a good offense, but they're definitely not an offense that makes you cringe because you feel like they're going to turn the ball over in stupid situations and that kind of thing. I think Maryland is going to be opportunistic defensively, and they've got a couple of guys on that D-line that are physically really just impressive players. Yeah. So I think that'll be the key there is Iowa. And this is going to sound wild saying it because we're talking about, can they get more explosive, but can they avoid the traps of the things that tend to happen on a Friday night game on the road?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I mean, to me, it's if Maryland can turn this into a track meet. I think you bring up really good points about how Iowa, though they've been underwhelming offensively, they've never shot themselves in the foot. Can they keep that up? But realistically speaking, I think it's more of, can Maryland not shoot themselves in the foot and turn this into a track meet and force Iowa to score 40 points? Can Iowa score 35 points? If Iowa can't score 35 points offensively with a very balanced, clean, no turnover type football game, I don't think they're going to beat this Maryland team, because I think Maryland's capable of scoring as many points as necessary to win the football game, whether it be 50, 60, 70 points. I think they can do it. So turn it into a track meet. If I'm Maryland, let's turn this into a fast break offense, track meet type football game.
It's so interesting you say that 35-point number for Iowa, because I was doing a radio hit earlier this week, and that was my literal point. when somebody asked me about Iowa and being a potential playoff team. I said the teams in the playoffs right now, F the defense. These are teams that are scoring 35 plus. They're scoring 35, 42, 49. Like, and the defense might give up 28 or 35. Yeah. But it doesn't matter because they can outscore teams. And that's where I'm at with these cats. Like, it'll be interesting to see if they can actually do that at some point. Yeah. Next one on the docket, we've got number 14, Michigan visiting Wisconsin. This is wild to say, but Wisconsin is a 2.5-point favorite right now. This game opened up as a pick'em in a lot of sports books. The over-under is 43.5. This is what I'll say about this. Michigan is 100% the better team in this game. They're a more well-rounded team. I think they've got – their defense might not be as good, but they've got a good defense. I think their offense is absolutely better than Wisconsin's offense. Weird shit happens for Michigan at Camp Randall.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a tough play it's a tough place to play. But I truly do still look for Michigan to be opportunistic defensively, create some short fields. Whether they capitalize with touchdowns or field goals, I don't think it really matters. I think they just need to turn opportunities and short fields into points and really force Graham to beat you. You know, I know what Graham did last year. He obviously has the ability to do it. And as we know in college football, it's a week-to-week thing. You never know. You know, does the kid get enough sleep? Does he not have an exam on Friday? Like, you never know.
Right.
But I really think Michigan's game plan defensively should be, let's make Graham beat us. Let's make their receivers have to separate against our defensive backs who, as we've talked about, Michigan has athletes. They got guys who they can rely on, at least from a pure talent standpoint. So for Michigan, it's make Graham beat us, and offensively, let's figure out a way to run the football creatively and stay on schedule and take advantage of opportunities that the defense gives us.
Yeah, no, I'm with that. And if I was putting money on the game, I'd put my money on Michigan for this one.
I agree.
We've got two more coming up here, and I had to throw this one in here, not because of Ohio State, but because Rutgers is going to make this the game, you know, because of how they performed so far this year. But number 11 Ohio State's visiting Rutgers. They're a 15.5-point favorite. Over under is 58. So the recent history of this game between Ohio State and Rutgers was there were two matchups that were 50-point margins. Then there was a matchup that was a 40-some point margin, a 30-something point margin, and then last year it dropped into the 20s, right? So we've seen these margins dwindle over the last few years, and I think it's going to continue to be that way this year. I'm not exactly sure this game would even be a 15-point game at the end. I think Rutgers has everything in its arsenal to make this a 7 or a 10-point game like they did with Michigan. And part of the reason I feel like that with Rutgers is a guy that you mentioned earlier in Noah Vedral, who is a true dual threat quarterback. And Ohio State offensive or defensively has had issues, just period. Not exactly sure that they faced that dual threat guy though yet this year. And I can say from experience that the game plan is just never what you want it to be when you got a guy who can threaten you both ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only guy that was relatively a dual threat was Anthony Brown, and they beat him, you know, at Oregon. I think that kid, you know, he had good enough, and it was enough of a threat with his feet. And he obviously played very well throwing the football. Yeah, and honestly, man, like Ohio State going to Piscataway, that stadium can present its own issues. It can get rowdy with the right situation and the right type of environment. It could also be flat out dead, depending upon what it is. So it's really hard to judge what that atmosphere, what that environment's going to be in with a young. I mean, Stroud's coming back this week, I would assume, correct?
Or if he's healthy, he'll play. Is what Ryan said. He said he's the guy as long as he's healthy.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. You know, if he's not playing, you got another young kid who came off a really good game last week in Kyle McCord. Thought he played well, but still, you know, it's a unique situation. It's a unique environment. You got young guys pulling the trigger. You got a very, very hungry defense who's playing really confident right now, who could create some opportunistic turnovers. But ultimately, I think Ohio State has the firepower offensively to outlast this. It's just going to depend on if they can mitigate any type of self-inflicted wounds to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm confident Ohio State will win this game. I'm just not confident that it won't be a super ugly game for Ohio State.
Yeah, it's not going to be just a straight up thrashing.
No, it's not the Rutgers from the old days, where you, like you said, you get in there and you got a 40-point margin, and all of a sudden you got the walk-on whose parents are cutting checks to the university playing linebacker,
Yeah, the loudest guy in the stadium selling peanuts in the student section. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This last one is Indiana at number 4, Penn State. It's a 13-point margin, over under 53.5. The only reason I put this on here is because Michael Penix Jr. actually played pretty well in this last game, went for 373 through the air, 66% completion, which is way higher than what he's been doing. And Penn State now is kind of riding that high to where they're in the playoff conversation, and they're coming off of an FCS team, albeit I think a really good FCS team. This is, I think, an opportunity for Indiana to want to get back on track. I think this is a maturity game, though, for Penn State. You mentioned the revenge aspect, and I think that's big. But maturity says if you're Penn State, you win this game the way you're supposed to.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think when you look at the win last week that Penn State had, and the rest of the top 25 teams in college football, and the way that some of these teams won, they won ugly. It was tough, and other teams lost. You had Clemson get knocked off. You had a few other things go wrong for a couple of those teams. You got to feel good about the way they played. Obviously, something we touched on, you want to see Penn State run the football a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what this game means for Penn State in the grand scheme of things. This is a maturity game. I think this is a game where if you are for real, you're going to go out and handle your business. And I think, honestly, they have the ability to cover and then some with this if they come out and do their thing, just because the way I think that defense is structured. If Indiana's not going to try to run the football, that back end, that defense for the Nittany Lions is tough. And
yes,
Penix has shown a propensity to turn the football over against very good teams and some talent, and even some lesser talented teams. So that's what I look for, at least for Penn State, is create some turnovers, get some momentum back defensively after giving up 17 points to a Villanova team, and offensively kind of try to find a little bit more of an identity running the football. And if not, keep Clifford hot, keep getting that man some opportunities and keep things going offensively.
Yeah. And talking about that Penn State run game, they had 80 yards off of 34 carries, which is a 2.4 average against Villanova. They've struggled all year to run the football. And so you'd love to see them get started there. And Indiana, frankly, is a team that struggled on the ground as well. So I think this will be one of those games where the hope, if you're rooting for, the Big Ten teams to really have a shot in the end of the year, is that Penn State handles business the way that they're supposed to in this one.
Correct.
All right, man. Well, felt like that was a pretty good one, albeit, all choppy here from the hotel. I'm not too far away from Rutgers right now. As a matter of fact, I am in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So I'll be hanging out with some of those cats tomorrow, and hopefully have some good content coming out for the Big Ten Network there. But this is the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network. Season 1, Episode 6, presented by our partners at Bet River Sportsbook. I'm Joshua Perry. That's my boy Christian Hackenberg. The best in the business when it comes to covering the Big Ten. We'll be back with you